Welcome to Undersampled Radio, episode 12. We actually are broadcasting live today. It's pretty exciting. We're up on YouTube right now. We're on Hangouts on air. So if you guys want to join us, you can do so by clicking on the link in the Software Underground Undersampled channel, and it will take you to our Undersampled Radio episode 12 page, where you can ask questions of us or of our guest. We have quite a bit of news for you today, and I'm going to let Matt lead the charge in that respect. You're on.
Cool. Hi. How's it
Hello.
going? Yeah, well, you know, the news is always just kind of what am I up to, from my point of view. It's because I haven't been paying all that much attention outside of things. I guess I've been slightly distracted this week by the live tweeting going on from the Oracle versus Google case, which we might get a chance to talk about a bit later. I blogged about it this week, but it's another geeky copyright case. And then the other thing I'm just kind of completely submerged in right now is our latest. We're doing a sort of series of books, 52 things you should know about X, and the latest one is rock physics. It sort of started off as geophysics part 2, because we already did geophysics. That was the first book we did. But it seems to have, early on it was kind of going in the quantitative kind of direction. So I think it's going to be called 52 Things You Should Know About Rock Physics. And we had all the essays in ages ago, and 2015 was just so sort of depressing that somehow just working on the book just didn't quite happen. So anyway, we're back in it now. It's going to be out in a few weeks. We're just editing like crazy at the moment.
Awesome. Where can we find it, by the way, when it comes out?
Well, okay, so we publish these books, like we're the publisher, so I say we, that's like me and my wife essentially, Cara, who is a publishing guru. So Agile Libra is the publishing company, but we publish them using Amazon's CreateSpace self-publishing platform, which is completely awesome. So it's print on demand. So when you order a book from Amazon, and that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of it, Amazon actually makes the copy right then. It is possible for bookshops and things to stock it. We don't sort of chase that market. It's so easy for us to do it through Amazon. We don't have to touch any inventory or do any fulfillment or touch orders or anything. But people do sometimes order, like, we give you discounts on bulk purchases if you want to buy them for people, and yeah, we do that kind of thing. So and in connection with that, I've just been reading a lot about some of the characters whose names pop up all the time in rock physics, like Gassman and Bio and Hasheen and Strickman and these people, who I just sort of realized in reading the manuscript that I had no idea who any of these people were, so I've been reading a bit about them.
Yeah, that guy has an equation or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually remarkably hard to even find out what their first names were. Like Gassman, it took a little bit of sleuthing around. And I just wanted to mention one more thing, because we're talking to Mark Tingay next week, Australian.
Surprise!
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. But the connection, I guess, there's a sort of topical connection, because next week is the 10th anniversary of Lumpur Lapindo, this huge mud volcano in East Java in Indonesia. And the reason why you might want to be aware of that before we get to it is because Mark's been tweeting, sort of live tweeting, as the events on the well, the exploration well that partly caused this eruption, or completely caused it, depending on point of view, he's been sort of tweeting the events that led up to it. So mud losses, difficult drilling, cavings, this kind of thing, that may, in retrospect, were early warning signs, essentially. So it's kind of fun following his Twitter account right now. He's publishing lots of pictures and bits from the drilling reports and that kind of thing. So yeah, at Mark Tingay on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, you guys should definitely go check that out. As Matt says, there's a lot of cool multimedia stuff on there for you to see. But we also, this week, have another exciting guest for you. Matt, you're on again.
Yeah, so Leo Ueda, I hope I'm not mangling your name too much. I remember you telling me how to pronounce it.
That was perfect.
Awesome, thanks. So, yeah, you can. So he's a researcher in Rio. Now I heard someone pronounce what I would call Rio de Janeiro, and a Brazilian pronounce it, and I was like, wow, I've never heard it pronounced that way. So I'll let you give us a quick lesson in that as well. Researcher, teacher. I described him as an open sorcerer, and he really liked that. www.leouieda.com, and he's on Twitter at Leo Ueda, so that's Leuieda. And yeah, Leo, welcome.
Thanks. It's great being here. First thing, Brazilian Portuguese is terribly pronounced, so that would be Rio de Janeiro.
Okay, that sounds okay.
Yeah, but I'm trying to have a bit of a neutral accent.
And is that where you are right now?
Thanks for having me. Yeah. In my bedroom, actually.
Awesome. So, is it all getting exciting in this lead up to the Olympics?
Yeah, exciting is one way to describe it.
There's been a lot of craziness happening lately.
Yeah, it's getting a bit scary here because there's tons changing with the whole political situation here. And the state of Rio is particularly being affected because it depends a lot on the oil industry. And since prices have just gone down and the whole thing with Petrobras, so the revenue for the state is just gone way down.
Is that where you're hiding in the black box?
Sorry?
Is that why you're locked away in a dark box there?
Yeah, basically, because since I work at a public university and we're almost completely funded by the state, and the state is broke, so we have absolutely no money.
So for those of you guys who don't know, who are listening, Leo has just finished his PhD, and in fact, he has already posted his paper to the Software Underground, and it's a fascinating paper, and I've suggested that he repost it after this episode. So if you're looking for it, go on, sign up at swung.rocks, and you can go check out the paper. But while we have you here, I guess a good lead-in question, other than how do you pronounce Rio de Janeiro, is what's your research in? What do you do?
I do mostly gravity and magnetic inverse problems. So it's trying to develop methods for doing the gravity and magnetic inversion. So it's a lot of linear algebra and programming. So it's mostly methods developed. Now I'm trying to go more into doing some cool applications, which was a bit left. How do I say this? Yeah, I didn't do much of that during my graduate studies. I focused more on computing and doing the actual methods. So now I'm trying to do some applications of what I've been developing.
Okay, so what's your edge? What's new about your research?
For my PhD, what I was doing is trying to do all the modeling in a spherical Earth. So instead of pretending that everything is Cartesian, just trying to do everything as a sphere. And then that poses all sorts of problems because then the forward modeling is not very straightforward. We don't have any analytical solutions, which is the case for Cartesian. So that's something that I've been working on since 2008 during my undergrad. And how do I do this numerical calculation? So that was the first part of my thesis. And the second part was getting the forward modeling and trying to do an inversion. And the particular problem that I chose was to try to map the depth of the Morro. So in spherical coordinates, so that I could apply that to a large area. So what I did then is try to calculate the Morro for the whole of South America. And that's the second part.
And when did Fatiando sort of come about? Was that something that you started yourself from scratch, or was it already a project when you started there, or where did that come from? That
was something that I always talked about with some friends during my undergrad, because the year that I started, there were a lot of people interested in computing, which was a bit odd. I mean, we were not a typical class, I guess, in that perspective, because most people don't really care too much. Now things are changing a bit, but so we always talked about trying to do something open source for modeling everything, because we were using all these bad programs, especially for gravity and magnetics. I think it's called GravMag. It was a particularly, I mean, it's good. It's free and a lot of people use it, but it's a bit dated. So we were trying to do something more up to date, but then that never got off the ground. We started doing that. We had even a project layout, and all of that is in the version control history of the Fatiando repository. So if you go back to the first commits, which I actually did while preparing my PhD thesis defense, so I went back and tried to see what the evolution was, and we started out as trying to do this forward modeling, 2D forward modeling program. That didn't work out, and then when I came to Rio to do my master's, I started developing all these like these little Python functions to do forward modeling and implement stuff that I was learning in my classes and trying to do my thesis. So I figured that I could maybe restart the project and make it a library instead of just an application.
Right. Tell us, now that we've got the history, tell us a little bit about what Fatiando is, for those of us who don't know.
Okay, so Fatiando is a library, a Python library for modeling and inversion in geophysics. So it basically is a bunch of functions and classes that try to automate some common tasks in modeling. So if and most of it right now is for potential fields, so gravity and magnetics. I started developing some seismic stuff, but that is still in beta. And for the gravity and magnetics part, you can do forward modeling using rectangular prisms. You can do more complex polygonal bodies. There's all the tesseract stuff, which is the modeling in spherical coordinates. And it has some processing utilities, so you can do upward continuation, calculate derivatives, do some interpolation. There's some more advanced gravity and magnetic stuff, like there's a technique called the equivalent layer, which is you do some, it's kind of an inversion that you can do, and then you do some forward modeling in order to do interpolation and calculate derivatives and things like that. There's also Euler deconvolution, and there's some stuff for plotting all of that in 3D using Mayavi, which depends on using VTK. And converting objects to VTK is not something that you want to do all the time, because the syntax is a bit complex. So there are some functions that convert the Fatiando objects for like prisms and stuff. It converts it to VTK and plots it in Mayavi.
Right. These
And
are like
there's
3D plotting, 3D visualization libraries, right?
yeah,
Or frameworks. Okay.
exactly.
What does
So if you
fatiando
have
mean in English?
fatiando a terra means slicing the earth. That's why the logo is this little earth all sliced. Uh, I think that's written on the website somewhere. I'm not sure if
And
in the latest
we'll have a link
modelings they
to
kept it.
we'll have a link to the show notes in. I mean, we'll have a link to Fatiando in the show notes if you want to check them out. That'll be posted on. It's already posted on Swung. Now that you've finished your PhD, what are you going to do? What are you doing currently?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, I'm just trying to get my projects organized. And since the university is on strike for 2 months now, and it doesn't look like it's gonna end before the Olympics, so now I'm trying to focus on research. So I have 2 undergrad students that are doing research with me. I'm trying to develop Fatiando a bit more, and yeah, trying to get some old stuff out and published. Things that I started doing my PhD, and then my PhD got in the way, and I had to stop it. So yeah, that's basically it. And waiting for the semester to finally start, and then start classes again.
What do you teach?
Right now, I teach 2 intro geophysics courses, because the university here, it only has a geology program. It doesn't have a geophysics program. So I teach 2 intro geophysics. One is gravity and magnetics. The other one is seismics, electric methods, and electromagnetics. And I also teach a introduction to computing and numerical calculus, and that is for the oceanography degree. So it's good that I can have contact with both students. They have very different profiles. The oceanography people tend to like math a bit more than the geology majors.
No, that's really cool. On this, since you mentioned calculus, I'm reading this awesome book at the moment called Burn Math Class. I think it's by Jason Wilkes, if I remember rightly. I could double check that. Who is I think he's a student, a PhD student of sort of math and psychology, I believe, if I'm remembering right. And Evan recommended this book to me. It's so awesome. Like, I really, really recommend it. Do check it out. He basically completely deconstructs mathematics, starts from addition and multiplication, and sort of derives calculus first,
Wow.
and then sort of trigonometry and logarithms and even some geometric stuff from that sort of beginning. You see, and his point is that you can't get to what are often called the prerequisites for calculus, things like trigonometry. You need calculus in order to understand them. I just sort of love his thesis, and it's a really quirky book. So yeah. Anyway, just a tip for anytime I hear someone's teaching maths, I'm like, okay, you have to read this book because I haven't read anything like it before. It's really good. So you're teaching a bit of computation. Like, do you think Fatiando as much a teaching tool potentially as it is a research tool?
Definitely. I use it. I don't use it in my computation class, but I use it for all my geophysics classes. So
Okay.
a lot of the functionality in Fatiando is, especially in the seismic module, which doesn't have much, but there are a lot of simplified problems that are great for teaching basic concepts. And I also try to use, because the classes, the geophysics classes are divided in some theoretical classes and labs. The labs are in my computer lab, where I have Python and everything installed. And then I give them a Jupyter notebook that explores some concept, like the thing that I'm teaching that week. And then I use the fatiando forward modeling and the processing routines together with the IPython widgets, so that then the students, they can interact with the code. So they don't have to program anything. I give them everything already. They just have to run the notebook, and then they get these slider widgets. And then they can test things like how does the magnetic anomaly vary if you vary the inclination and declination of the geomagnetic field. What happens when you do upward continuation? How far up can you go? What happens if you increase the level of noise in the data? For the seismics part, I was using an experimental part of Fatiando it's a finite difference modeling. And then that code, you can run a simulation for an acoustic simulation, or you can also run a fully elastic simulation. So you can get P and SV waves on one of the simulations. So then I can build them a model, and then I can show them, look, this is a P wave, and look at how it's vibrating. So you can see that the P wave is vibrating along the propagation direction. You can see the S waves vibrating perpendicular. You can see what happens if you make a P wave. If you just generate a P wave and make it reflect off of an interface, and then the simulation generates S waves as well. So that's pretty cool. So I can give them the simulation and then ask a question and say, oh, what happens when the P wave hits an interface? What's the angle of incidence? And you can see the angle in the simulation. So then they can calculate what's the reflection angle for an S wave, and for a P wave, is it different? So I generally just give them the notebook and a bunch of questions, and then they have to go through the notebook and use the interactive stuff, discuss among themselves, and answer the questions.
That sounds like an awesome teaching methodology. I wish that when I was in school we had a bit more self-guided, pace-as-you-go work where you could actually, as a student, get invested a bit in your projects and experiment some.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm doing this, because the classes that I learned the most in university were usually the ones where the professor gave me something to do, and then I had to get that done. So then you go and study with a focus instead of just studying for an exam, and then you have no idea what all that is about, what it's for.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
And the students love it. I mean, at least I'm getting. I tried to do a survey and what they liked, what they didn't like after they graduated. Most of them they loved the practical classes. Most of the complaints were that sometimes they were too long, because the first time you do it, then it's kind of hard to make it fit in the class schedule. But
right.
But yeah, the students loved the interactive exercises.
Excellent. It's a great idea. Hey, Matt, why don't you tell us about Google versus Oracle?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I just sort of interested in this case because the contention is not over like the copying of code, but it's over the copying of the interface to the code, the API, the application programming interface. So it's about it's almost like claiming that the user interface for programmers, is how I described it in this blog post, was copyrightable, and it's kind of interesting partly because there's $9 billion worth of damages being sought by Oracle. And partly because the case was already, essentially the court already determined that the API wasn't copyrightable and that Google was in the clear, and Google had a fair use claim, which was moot, I guess, once they decided it wasn't copyrightable in the first place. but this was turned around by the Court of Appeals, and so now it's back in the district court, but this time with a jury. And so the interesting thing there is that none of the jury have any technology experience. You know, they're ordinary sort of citizens, if you like, with no knowledge of programming or what an API is. And I guess the reason why I kind of put it in the show notes for today with Leo was just because the implications for just how software works and open source and stuff that's on the web could be quite profound if Oracle wins. You know, there could be a real gold rush, essentially, of people claiming that their APIs were copied. I mean, and I guess it's especially relevant to bring up with Leo because the reason why I kind of connected with Leo in the first place, I think it was through Twitter, right, Leo? If I recall.
Yeah,
maybe
probably.
Fatiana. Actually, I bet what it was on the plane on the way to an open source conference or a workshop in Copenhagen at EAGE in 2012. I built this Wikipedia page with all the open source geophysics software I could find, and Fatiando would have been on there, and I probably wrote to you saying, can you just check that I've got all the license and all of that stuff right? I'm just guessing, but I bet that's right. Yeah.
Well, that happened. I don't know if that was the first time.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
But probably, yeah.
So I know Leo as a real open source advocate who, you know, is sort of one of these people who does reproducibility really well. It's sort of built into Leo's research. If you go and check out his website, you'll see, you know, and when he did one of the early tutorials in the leading edge, and you know, he's like, not just, oh yeah, here's my code, but it's like, here's my manuscript, and here's all my figures, and here's like all these scripts that regenerate everything, and so that was why I kind of brought it up today. So I don't know, Leo, have you been following that case at all, and what do you think about the implications for API copying?
I wasn't following it until you wrote your post, and then after that I was reading some stuff about it. Yeah, and then it could really be a problem because there are a lot of, especially if the web API is copyrightable, then probably all APIs are copyrightable.
Right.
So then I would probably have some problem with that because the inversion package, the inverse problems package in Fatiando, it copies the scikit-learn API.
Right.
Yeah, it's not an exact copy, but it's definitely, I mean, there's no denying that it's inspired because scikit-learn is one of the best libraries out there.
Yeah, and the sort of the selling point almost of scikit-learn, which is a Python library for machine learning, it is that the API is the same, and lots of other people have copied it too in their packages. Right? I think the last thing
exactly
a scikit-learn like API for TensorFlow, which is Google's deep learning library, and yeah, okay, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that could, and I imagine there are a lot of other cases where you have an open source alternative that copies the API of some proprietary software.
Yeah, right.
I'm guessing, I mean, I don't really know too much about this, but I'm guessing the open source NVIDIA drivers for Linux, I think it's called Nouveau or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, it's probably copying something related to the interface, and yeah, then that might be illegal after that.
Right. Yeah, it's interoperability, right? Is the reason why people do this, so that we can have nice things. Oh man.
Why are you doing all this legal research, Matt? If you can say on air.
I have a lot of time in jail. Just, I don't know. You know, the GSI thing I'd been following on and off for a while, and partly just because of all the issues around open data and open seismic data. Yeah, don't know. I don't think I'd used the legal tag on the blog before, so I don't think I've blogged about legal stuff before. Maybe once or twice about copyright type issues and open access. It's one of those things that, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, Leo, but I mean, people are sort of, I don't know. I know it's kind of a boring subject, but most people are really quite ignorant of copyright, what's okay to reuse, what isn't. I mean, I was reading some law blog the other day, and I swear it was completely full of basically illegally reproduced images as illustration through the blog posts. And you go to any talk, and I mean, it's full of copyright images without attribution or whatever. And I don't know.
It's kind of hard to get started on that because I probably do some stuff like that without knowing.
Yeah, and it's hard not to, right? It's so easy to copy an image or whatever. Sure.
And
now it's released.
There are no there are no classes about that.
If you guys want to learn
exactly.
a little bit about it, go check out Agile's post. You can go check out Matt's post on agilegeoscience.com. It's fascinating, and I urge you to check it out, especially if you do publishing of any kind, especially scientific or, in this case, reproducible with APIs.
And you know, part of it, like, just to finish that, like, why do I care, is because you know, those of us who publish things openly, there are still terms and conditions attached to open source licenses and open access content, Creative Commons, so on and so forth. And we would like people to respect the terms and conditions in those open licenses too. And so I sort of feel like, and this is why I don't know if you guys have heard of Sci-Hub, but it's this sort of I shouldn't have told you what it was called because it's kind of awesome, but I really disagree with it on a profound level. So basically, Sci-Hub is this place you can go where if you can't get hold of a paper because it's behind a paywall or whatever, you can put the DOI into Sci-Hub, and they've probably already downloaded it. So you can have the PDF for free. So it's completely illegal. It's Russian, you know, not I believe, maybe Ukrainian or something. But anyway, it's from this sort of Eastern Europe, and I really disagree with it. Not because, I mean, I like the idea of making research accessible, like scientific research should be accessible. I agree with the premise, if you like, but just violating the terms of service isn't, I don't think, the way to go about solving that problem. I think the way to go about it is to aggressively, basically, completely just embrace open access stuff and say, I'm just going to ignore the closed literature. Like, if it's behind a paywall, I guess it's off. Like, I don't read papers in Chinese either. So, do you know what I mean? It's not like you don't already ignore a whole bunch of literature. So I just sort of feel like, just stop citing it, stop reviewing papers that are going behind a paywall, and start publishing things with an open license. Like, that's how we get progress.
There's a bit of a problem with that. I mean, not reviewing for paywall journals. That is okay. I mean, sure, we can do that because we don't get paid anything to review anyway, and we get nothing actually. I mean, you get like knowledge of the current trends in research and stuff like that, but you don't really get much out of doing reviews. So. But publishing only open access can be a financial problem sometimes. So if you want, I mean, I wouldn't publish in geophysics, for example, if I had to do it open access, because the publishing fee I think is $2,000, and with the current exchange rate for me, it's just impossible. All of the money from a grant would go into publishing 1 or 2 papers.
Right.
So that's not always an option. I know that PLOS ONE usually gives, they can give you a waiver on the fee, but that's not guaranteed. There are some EGU journals which are open access and they're not very expensive. And they are great. They have this new open review system, but it usually costs more. Even if it doesn't cost too much, it costs more than nothing, which is sometimes what you pay for a paywall. So that can be a bit of a problem of just going open all the way right now. Not everybody can pay for it. Not everybody can get a waiver.
Yeah, right. No, I hear you, and these are all problems, I guess, with these sort of transitional things, right? Where there's a sort of incumbent system where right now we're all just spending. I mean, if you're an institution, you're spending tons and tons of money on publications. It's just that you do it after publication, right?
Yeah.
Because you subscribe to all of these journals and so on. So it's just like right now, everything's kind of backwards, and right now, all of the sort of publishing, the channels are through Elsevier and Wiley and so on, and who have overhead and have these cost structures in place already. So until we get an emergence of open access publishers and et cetera, it is going to be this weird middle space. I mean, I'd love to see organizations like SEG like really getting behind like how can we make it more accessible, especially to people outside of the US or who don't have a lot of industry support for their research. But yeah, no, it's a big. I think it's an exciting time, right, to be in science for all sorts of reasons. The technology,
definitely,
and everything, and the publications changing is one of them.
Well, we will put some links to open access publishing on the show notes, so go check it out if you don't know about it. It's certainly something that you should look into. In many cases, there are some cost-prohibitive options, but in many cases, the costs outweigh the benefits outweigh the costs. So, with that, I want to say, Leo, thanks for coming on the show. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Leo.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next week with Mark Tingay on Undersampled Radio. Thanks. Bye.
Cheerio.